He thought the puppy had chosen the wrong man. But sometimes, broken souls recognize each other long before words ever can. Rain tapped softly against the windows of Harbor Pines Animal Shelter on the Oregon coast, the kind of cold February rain that carried the scent of saltwater, wet cedar, and old grief. The fluorescent lights above the adoption hall buzzed faintly, casting pale reflections across the polished concrete floor while families wandered between kennels holding paper coffee cups and talking in warm hopeful voices. Children pointed excitedly at wagging tails. Volunteers smiled through exhaustion. Somewhere near the back, a golden retriever barked happily at a toddler wearing rain boots shaped like ducks. But in the last kennel beside the emergency intake room, a small German Shepherd puppy remained silent. He was barely 4 months old, underweight beneath his sable fur, one ear standing while the other folded halfway at the tip. A faded blue blanket lay untouched in the corner beside a metal food bowl he hadn't finished since morning. The tag clipped outside the kennel read ASH. Difficult to socialize. Fear response around men. Shelter manager Olivia Bennett rubbed her tired eyes as she watched another couple stop hopefully in front of the enclosure before Ash retreated instantly behind the steel bed frame. Poor little guy, the woman whispered. Looks terrified. He had arrived 3 weeks earlier after being found near an abandoned logging road outside Astoria, soaked from the rain and trembling so badly the rescue team thought he wouldn't survive the night. No collar. No chip. No history. Just those strange amber eyes that never seemed to stop searching for something. Or someone. Near the front entrance, the bell above the shelter door chimed softly as another visitor stepped inside from the rain. Ethan Cole removed his dark baseball cap slowly, water dripping from the brim onto the mat beneath his boots. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Late 30s. The kind of man who carried silence around him like body armor. His charcoal jacket smelled faintly of ocean wind and motor oil, and a pale scar disappeared beneath the sleeve near his wrist. Olivia noticed him immediately because men like Ethan rarely came into shelters unless someone dragged them there. He glanced around once, expression unreadable, then looked toward the rows of kennels with the detached focus of someone scanning exits instead of searching for companionship. Can I help you? Olivia asked gently. Ethan nodded once. Just looking. His voice was calm but distant, worn thin around the edges. Outside, thunder rolled softly above the coastline. Ethan moved slowly past the kennels while dogs barked and pressed against their gates for attention, but he barely reacted. A Labrador dropped a tennis ball at his feet. He stepped around it. A beagle cried softly for affection. Nothing. Then he reached the final kennel. Ash froze instantly. For one long second, neither moved. The shelter seemed quieter there somehow, the distant chatter fading beneath the hum of rain against the roof. Ethan looked down at the puppy with tired gray eyes that had seen too many empty places. Ash stepped forward carefully. No growling. No retreat. Olivia straightened in disbelief. That's strange, she whispered. Ash approached the gate slowly until his tiny paws touched the bottom rail. His ears lowered. His body trembled once. Then, without warning, he pressed himself against the kennel door directly in front of Ethan. Not fear. Not panic. Recognition. Ethan frowned slightly. You sure this is the same dog? Olivia gave a nervous laugh. He hasn't gone near a man since he got here. Ash let out a soft whimper unlike anything Olivia had heard from him before. Ethan crouched reluctantly, resting one forearm against his knee. The puppy moved closer immediately, nose twitching near Ethan's sleeve before gently touching the scar near his wrist. The instant his nose brushed the faded skin, Ash made a small broken sound deep in his throat and pressed himself harder against the gate as though trying to reach him through it. Ethan's jaw tightened. Something flickered across his face. Not fear. Something worse. Memory. Olivia reached carefully for the latch. Do you want me to before she could finish, Ash squeezed through the partially opened kennel door, stumbled across the concrete floor, and climbed directly into Ethan's lap. The room fell silent. The puppy buried his face against Ethan's chest beneath the damp jacket and began trembling again, but this time he did not look afraid. He looked relieved. The rain followed them all the way north along Highway 101, drifting sideways across the windshield in silver ribbons while the Pacific crashed somewhere beyond the dark cliffs beside the road. Ethan drove with both hands tight on the steering wheel of his old Ford truck, the heater humming softly against the cold damp air trapped inside the cab. He had not planned to bring the puppy home. Even now, the small German shepherd slept curled tightly against the passenger seat with Ethan's folded flannel jacket beneath his head, rising and falling with slow exhausted breaths like he had finally decided the world was safe enough to rest in. Every so often the truck passed through pockets of fog rolling inland from the ocean, swallowing the headlights for a few seconds before releasing them again. Ethan hated driving at night. Too much silence. Too much room for memories to crawl back in. His cabin sat nearly 15 miles outside Cannon Beach near a strip of dense pine forest overlooking the water. Small. Weathered. Isolated enough that nobody bothered him there. The porch light flickered weakly as he parked in the gravel driveway just after 9 o'clock. Rainwater dripped steadily from the gutters while distant waves pounded against black shoreline rock somewhere below the cliffs. Ethan shut off the engine and sat motionless for a moment. The puppy stirred immediately. Amber eyes blinking awake. Watching him. Waiting. "You are not staying long," Ethan muttered quietly. Ash tilted his head once as though trying to understand every word. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedarwood, coffee grounds, and cold fireplace ash. Everything was neat in the careful way lonely people keep things neat. Boots lined beside the door. One plate drying beside the sink. A single blanket folded over the couch. No photographs anywhere. Ash stepped cautiously across the wooden floorboards, nails clicking softly while he inspected each corner with nervous curiosity. But the moment Ethan disappeared into the kitchen, the puppy followed close behind, almost touching his leg with every step. Ethan opened a cabinet and pulled down an old metal bowl. "Food first," he said. Ash watched every movement carefully but did not touch the kibble after Ethan filled the bowl and slid it across the floor. Instead, the puppy sat beside the kitchen table and stared up at him. Ethan sighed heavily. "You survived the shelter. You can survive one night without acting like I am your dad." Still nothing. Outside, wind rattled the windows hard enough to make the old cabin creak. Ethan leaned against the counter, exhaustion hanging from his shoulders like wet canvas. There had been a time he could sleep through artillery fire, helicopters, thunderstorms. Now even rain against glass kept him awake half the night. Ash finally approached the food bowl slowly, sniffed it once, then walked away untouched and settled near Ethan's boots instead. The puppy lowered his small body onto the hardwood floor with a quiet sigh. Guarding position. Ethan frowned. Seriously? The puppy did not move. An hour later the storm deepened. The ocean wind moaned through the trees surrounding the cabin while Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table nursing black coffee gone cold 20 minutes earlier. The digital clock above the stove read 11:43 p.m. Ash remained asleep beside his chair, one paw resting lightly against Ethan's boot as though making sure he had not disappeared. Then it happened again. That pressure in Ethan's chest. Tight. Sudden. Invisible. His breathing changed first. Too shallow. Too fast. The room seemed smaller somehow, darker around the edges. Ethan gripped the edge of the table hard enough for his knuckles to pale. Not now. Not tonight. He closed his eyes briefly, trying to steady himself before the memories surfaced fully. Sandstorms. Smoke. Radio static. Someone shouting his name far away. Then warmth touched his hand. Ethan looked down sharply. Ash was awake, standing beside him with ears lowered and worried amber eyes fixed directly on his face. The puppy pressed closer until his small body rested against Ethan's knee. Not playful. Not needy. Grounding him. Pulling him back into the room. Back into the sound of rain and old wood and breathing. Ethan swallowed hard. Ash slowly placed one paw against the scar on Ethan's wrist again and stayed there without moving. The storm lingered over the coastline through the night, dragging sheets of rain across the cliffs while the old cabin settled and groaned beneath the weight of wind coming off the Pacific. Ethan barely slept. He drifted in and out of shallow exhaustion on the couch with one arm hanging over his eyes while the television played silently in the background, flickering pale blue shadows across the room. Sometime after 3 in the morning, he woke suddenly to the sound of soft scratching. Not loud. Careful. Persistent. Ash stood near the hallway leading toward the back of the cabin, ears raised, staring into the darkness beyond the kitchen. Scratch. 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 Ethan rubbed his face slowly. No, he muttered hoarsely. Not happening. The puppy glanced back at him but returned immediately to the hallway, scratching again at the narrow basement door tucked beneath the staircase. Ethan's jaw tightened. The basement remained locked for a reason. He had not stepped down there in almost 7 years. Not since the day he carried the final storage box inside, shut off the light, and promised himself he would never reopen that part of his life again. Ash whimpered softly now, paw still resting against the door. Ethan stood reluctantly, exhaustion weighing heavily in his movements as he crossed the creaking floorboards. There is nothing down there, he said firmly. You hear me? The puppy only stared upward at him with those strange amber eyes that always seemed older than they should have been. Wind rattled the windows harder. Somewhere outside, tree branches scraped softly against the roof like fingertips. Ethan turned away toward the sink, hoping the puppy would eventually give up, but 5 minutes later the scratching started again. Slower this time. More deliberate. Like a signal. By dawn the storm had weakened into cold mist rolling between the trees. Pale gray light filtered through the kitchen windows while Ethan poured stale coffee into a chipped ceramic mug. Ash had not left the basement door once. He sat there silently now, tail curled around his paws, watching Ethan over his shoulder every few seconds as though waiting for permission. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. You are unbelievably stubborn. The puppy stood immediately. Ethan walked down the hallway toward the basement while old floorboards groaned beneath his weight. The brass handle felt colder than he remembered. For a moment his hand stayed frozen there. The cabin became very quiet. No wind. No scratching. Just the low hum of the refrigerator behind them and Ash breathing softly beside his leg. Ethan unlocked the door. A stale wave of dust and cedar drifted upward from the darkness below. The basement stairs disappeared into shadows untouched by daylight. Ash moved first. Not rushed. Calm. Purposeful. Ethan followed slowly, one hand gripping the railing while old memories pressed against his chest harder with every step downward. The basement smelled like forgotten years. Gun oil. Cardboard. Damp wood. A single pull chain light still hung near the bottom of the stairs. Ethan hesitated before tugging it once. Weak yellow light flickered overhead. The room emerged slowly from darkness. Shelves lined with sealed storage bins. Old tactical gear stacked carefully against the far wall. A folded American flag inside a dusty glass frame. And near the corner beneath a canvas tarp sat a weathered black military trunk Ethan had not touched in years. Ash walked directly toward it. No hesitation. No fear. Ethan stopped breathing for a second. The puppy sniffed the trunk once, then sat quietly beside it. Waiting. Ethan stared at the faded white lettering still visible across the metal surface beneath the dust. C. Mason. K9 Unit 7. His throat tightened instantly. He had not spoken that name aloud in years. Ash rested one paw gently against the trunk and looked back at Ethan again. Not playful. Not curious. Certain. Ethan crossed the room slowly until his boots stopped inches away from the old container. His hands trembled before he even reached for the latch. Somewhere above them, rain tapped softly against the cabin roof, while the ocean roared beyond the cliffs like a distant memory refusing to die. For a long moment, Ethan could not move. Dust floated through the weak basement light while the old military trunk sat open halfway between the past and the present like something breathing quietly in the corner of the room. Ash remained beside it without fear, tail still against the concrete floor, amber eyes following Ethan carefully as if the puppy understood exactly what had been buried down here all these years. Ethan finally crouched beside the trunk, joints stiff from tension more than age. His hand hovered above the lid before slowly lifting it open the rest of the way. The smell hit him first. Faded canvas. Gun oil. Desert sand trapped inside old fabric seams. Beneath neatly folded tactical gear rested a worn leather leash, cracked from years of use but still polished where strong fingers had once gripped it every day. Beside it lay a stainless steel water bowl scratched along the edges and two tarnished dog tags wrapped carefully in cloth. Ethan stared at them without blinking. Cairo. The name alone felt heavy enough to crack something inside his chest. Ash stepped closer quietly until his shoulder touched Ethan's forearm. The puppy did not whine. He simply stayed there. Present. Ethan swallowed hard and lifted the leash slowly from the trunk. Dust fell softly onto the concrete floor beneath his boots. The leather still carried faint bite marks near the handle from training drills years ago. Cairo used to tug it whenever he got impatient before missions, eager to work, eager to protect. Ethan remembered the sound of helicopter blades over black ocean water. The sting of salt wind. A pair of intelligent amber eyes watching him for commands without hesitation. He remembered trust so complete it felt sacred. His jaw tightened painfully. "You deserved better than me," he whispered into the silence before he could stop himself. Ash tilted his head slightly at the sound of his voice. Near the bottom of the trunk sat a small waterproof case Ethan had not seen in years. His stomach sank immediately. He knew what was inside before he touched it. Helmet camera footage. The final mission. The one memory he spent 7 years outrunning. Ethan almost shoved it back into the trunk unopened. Almost. But Ash suddenly rested one paw against his wrist again. Gentle pressure. Steady. Ethan looked down at the puppy. Those strange eyes held him there without fear or judgment. Just patience. Outside the storm had faded into a cold ocean drizzle tapping softly against the cabin windows overhead. Ethan exhaled slowly and carried the waterproof case upstairs. The television screen flickered pale blue across the dark living room while morning fog pressed thick against the glass outside. Ash climbed onto the couch beside him without invitation and curled tightly against his side as Ethan inserted the memory card into an old laptop sitting beneath the coffee table. His fingers trembled once before pressing play. Static filled the screen first. Wind. Darkness. Then desert moonlight appeared through shaky camera movement. The footage bounced with hurried breathing and muffled radio chatter while shadows crossed narrow alleyways lined with broken stone walls somewhere thousands of miles and several lifetimes away. Ethan's pulse hammered instantly. He almost shut it off. Then Cairo appeared on screen. Strong. Alert. Moving beside him with perfect focus beneath the glow of distant floodlights. Ethan stared at the dog frozen in time. Every movement precise. Every glance loyal. The room around him disappeared completely. Ash lifted his head slowly as though recognizing the animal on the screen. Then the footage shifted violently. Dust filled the camera. Sound distorted beneath shouting and static. Ethan's breathing became shallow again. But through the chaos one image emerged clearly enough to stop his heart. Cairo turning back. Not away from danger. Toward Ethan. The dog lunged through smoke and debris directly toward where Ethan had fallen. Not abandoning him. Returning for him. Ethan froze completely. 7 years of guilt cracked open in silence. His throat tightened so hard it hurt. He had spent every day believing he failed the dog who trusted him most. But the footage showed something else entirely. Cairo chose him. Even at the very end. Beside him on the couch, Ash slowly rested his head against Ethan's chest while the old screen flickered quietly in the dim cabin light. Ethan lowered his shaking hand into the puppy's fur and closed his eyes for the first time in years without trying to escape the memory. The cabin stayed unusually quiet after that morning. No television. No music. Only the distant crash of waves below the cliffs and the soft rhythmic sound of Ash breathing near the fireplace while gray daylight drifted through the windows. Ethan sat at the kitchen table for nearly an hour without moving, the old dog tags resting beside his untouched coffee mug. Cairo's name caught the weak light every few seconds whenever rainwater slid down the glass outside. 7 years. 7 years of believing the same lie. He rubbed both hands slowly across his face, exhaustion carved deep beneath his eyes. Ash watched him carefully from across the room, ears twitching whenever Ethan's breathing changed. The puppy no longer looked frightened inside the cabin. Somehow, overnight, he had begun acting like he belonged there. Like he had been waiting for this place. Ethan finally stood and reached for his truck keys hanging beside the door. "Come on," he muttered quietly. Ash was on his feet immediately. The drive back to Harbor Pines Animal Shelter took almost an hour beneath low-hanging clouds that turned the Oregon coastline silver and cold. Wind bent the pine trees near the cliffs while gulls drifted silently above the highway searching the tide below. Ash sat upright in the passenger seat this time instead of sleeping, watching the road ahead with alert amber eyes. Every few miles he glanced toward Ethan as if checking something invisible. Olivia Bennett looked genuinely surprised when Ethan stepped back into the shelter carrying the puppy against his chest beneath a dark rain jacket. "Well," she said softly, "I guess he decided for both of you." Ethan gave the smallest shake of his head. "I need information." Her expression shifted immediately. 20 minutes later they sat inside her cramped office near the rear kennels while rain tapped steadily against the roof overhead. Filing cabinets lined one wall beside stacks of intake forms and half-empty coffee cups. Ash lay quietly beside Ethan's chair with his head resting across Ethan's boot. Olivia opened a thin manila folder and sighed softly. "Honestly, there is not much here. Whoever dropped him off did not stay." Ethan looked up sharply. "Someone brought him in." "About 3 weeks ago," she replied. "Early morning. Before sunrise. One of our volunteers found him wrapped in an old military blanket outside the gate." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "Military?" Olivia nodded. "Dark green wool. Older issue." She hesitated before pulling out a folded photograph taken the morning Ash arrived. Ethan stared at the image carefully. The puppy looked thinner then. Wet fur. Mud along his paws. But around his neck sat something partially hidden beneath the blanket. A worn leather collar. Ethan leaned closer instantly. "Can you zoom that?" Olivia turned the computer monitor toward him. The grainy photograph sharpened slightly. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Burned into the faded leather strap was a small emblem almost erased with age. K9 Unit 7. The same insignia from Cairo's old gear downstairs. The room suddenly felt smaller. Ash lifted his head slowly from Ethan's boot and stared directly at the photograph on the screen. One ear twitched. Then the puppy released a low soft whine deep in his throat. Olivia frowned. "You know what that means?" Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the collar. That unit was dissolved years ago. Well, Olivia said carefully, there is something else. She reached into the folder again and removed a folded note sealed inside plastic. We almost threw this away because there was no signature. Ethan unfolded the damp paper slowly. The handwriting was rough and uneven like someone writing inside a moving vehicle. He read the sentence once. Then again. He deserves the truth now. Ethan's chest tightened hard enough to hurt. No name. No explanation. Just that one sentence. Ash rose quietly onto all fours beside him and pressed against Ethan's leg. Outside, thunder rolled low across the Pacific while the fluorescent lights overhead flickered once. Olivia lowered her voice. Whoever left him here knew exactly who you were. Ethan stared at the note in silence while Ash rested his head gently against his knee as though trying to steady him before the next storm arrived. The rain finally stopped sometime after sunset, leaving the coastline wrapped in drifting fog that rolled slowly through the pine trees outside Ethan's cabin like pale smoke. The world felt quieter afterward. Cleaner somehow. Ash stood near the front window watching the darkness beyond the glass while Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table turning the unsigned note over repeatedly between his fingers. He deserves the truth now. 4 words. That was all. Yet they sat heavier in the room than any memory he had tried to bury downstairs. The old dog tags remained beside his coffee mug where he kept catching himself staring at them without realizing it. Cairo. Even now the name carried weight inside his chest like something unfinished. Ethan leaned back slowly and closed his eyes. He had spent years believing isolation was punishment he deserved. Easier to disappear than explain why he survived when others did not. Easier to let friendships die quietly than answer questions about the nightmares that still woke him before dawn. But now there was a puppy asleep beside the fireplace who somehow knew exactly where the fractures were. Ash lifted his head suddenly. Ears alert. Not toward the window. Toward Ethan. The puppy stood and crossed the room slowly before placing both front paws against Ethan's knee. What? Ethan asked quietly. Ash stared at him for one long second, then glanced toward the hallway leading downstairs. Ethan frowned immediately. No, the puppy looked back again. Persistent. Calm. Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose. You really do not quit. 10 minutes later they were back in the basement beneath the weak pull-chain light while cold damp air clung to the concrete walls. Ash walked directly to the old military trunk again, but this time he ignored the gear. Instead, he moved toward a narrow storage shelf hidden behind stacked supply bins near the back wall. The puppy began sniffing carefully beneath a faded canvas tarp. Ethan watched in silence before finally stepping forward and pulling the tarp aside. Underneath sat another case he barely remembered storing there years ago. Smaller. Waterproof. Navy gray. His stomach tightened instantly. Training equipment. Ash sat beside the case quietly, tail brushing once against the floor. Ethan crouched and opened it slowly. Inside rested an old brass whistle attached to black cord webbing worn smooth with age. Beneath it lay folded K-9 evaluation reports and faded photographs from training exercises under desert sunlight. Ethan stared at one image in particular. Cairo standing proudly beside another German Shepherd female near the K-9 compound in Coronado years earlier. The resemblance hit him immediately. Same amber eyes. Same sable markings along the muzzle. Same half tilt of the left ear. Ethan's pulse quickened. No way, he whispered. Ash stepped closer and sniffed gently at the photograph before looking back up at him. Ethan reached for the whistle slowly. He had not used it since the funeral. The metal felt cold in his hand. Worn. Familiar. This is crazy, he muttered quietly. Still, he lifted it toward his lips and gave one short controlled whistle into the silence. Sharp. Precise. Ash reacted instantly. The puppy sat upright at attention without hesitation, eyes locked directly onto Ethan. Ethan froze. That command sequence had never been public. Only Unit 7 handlers used it during advanced K-9 training rotations. Ash remained perfectly still waiting for the next signal. The basement suddenly felt too small again. Ethan lowered the whistle slowly, heart pounding harder than it had in years. "Who trained you?" he whispered. Ash's ears relaxed slightly, but he never looked away from him. Then the puppy crossed the room quietly and rested against Ethan's side as if the answer itself did not matter nearly as much as what came next. Upstairs, the cabin phone rang suddenly through the silence. Once. Twice. 3 times. Ethan rarely received calls anymore. Almost nobody had the number. He climbed the basement stairs slowly with Ash following close behind. The old phone continued ringing in the kitchen beneath the dim yellow light. Ethan stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Yeah." Silence crackled softly through the line beneath distant highway noise. Then a familiar voice spoke quietly from somewhere far away. "Older now. Tired." "Ethan," the man said carefully. "You finally found the dog." Ethan's blood ran cold instantly. He knew that voice. Ryan Mercer. Former teammate. Last man to see Cairo alive. The cabin fell silent after Ryan Mercer spoke his name. Ethan stood motionless beside the kitchen counter with the phone pressed tightly against his ear while fog drifted past the windows outside like pale ghosts moving through the trees. Ash remained close against his leg, watching him carefully. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, a foghorn echoed low across the dark Pacific. Ethan swallowed once before answering. "How did you get this number?" Ryan gave a tired breath on the other end of the line. "You still ask the wrong questions first." His voice sounded older now. Roughened by time and regret. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. He had not spoken to Ryan in almost 7 years. Not since the mission. Not since Cairo. "Answer me," Ethan said quietly. Silence crackled through the phone line for a second before Ryan spoke again. "I heard about the shelter dog 3 days ago. Olivia called an old veterans network trying to trace the military caller. Soon as she described him, I knew." Ethan glanced down at Ash instinctively. The puppy sat calmly beside him beneath the dim kitchen light, one ear tilted slightly toward the sound of Ryan's voice through the receiver. "Who is he?" Ethan asked. Ryan exhaled slowly. His mother was part of the breeding line connected to Unit 7 after the program shut down. Cairo's bloodline. Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. The room suddenly felt colder. "That is impossible." "No," Ryan replied softly. "What is impossible is how long you stayed buried after what happened." Ethan looked away toward the rain streaking the windows. He did not answer. Ryan continued carefully, voice quieter now. "Ethan. Cairo did not fail you that night." Those words landed harder than any accusation ever had. Ethan leaned heavily against the counter as memories pushed against his chest again. Dust. Heat. Static. Cairo turning back through the smoke instead of running. "I saw the footage," Ethan whispered. There was silence on the line after that. Then Ryan finally said, "Good." Ash stood slowly and pressed against Ethan's knee. Grounding him again. Ryan's voice lowered further. "You want the truth. Cairo stayed alive long enough for us to reach him after extraction." Ethan stopped breathing. "What?" "We got him to a field medic station." Ryan sounded like a man carrying the weight of that memory carefully in both hands. "He was hurt bad, but he kept fighting every second anybody touched you. Like he thought his job was not done until he knew you were breathing." Ethan stared into the darkness outside the kitchen window while his throat tightened painfully. "Why did nobody tell me?" Ryan took a long pause before answering. "Because after surgery, after recovery, you disappeared." The words hurt because they were true. Ethan had shut down after the mission. Ignored calls. Ignored teammates. Buried every reminder underground with the trunk downstairs. Ryan continued quietly. Before Cairo passed, one of the handlers from the breeding program promised to preserve the line. Said dogs like that carried something rare. Ethan lowered himself slowly into the nearest chair while Ash rested his chin gently on Ethan's thigh. "So somebody sent me one of his bloodline puppies?" "Not just anybody," Ryan replied. "Me." Ethan looked up sharply. "You?" "I tracked the puppy for months after the breeder got shut down. The second I saw his eyes, I knew." Ryan gave a small tired laugh with no humor in it. Same stubborn look Cairo had every time he thought he needed to protect somebody. Ethan stared down at Ash in silence. The puppy gazed back at him calmly beneath the soft kitchen light. No fear. No uncertainty. Just trust. Ryan's voice softened. "That dog did not find the wrong man, Ethan." Outside, wind moved gently through the pines while ocean mist drifted across the cliffs below the cabin. Ethan reached down slowly and rested his hand against Ash's neck. Warm fur. Steady breathing. Alive. For the first time in years, something inside him loosened instead of tightening. Very quietly, almost like the words frightened him, Ethan whispered, "Hey there, partner." Ash's tail brushed softly against the wooden floor once. Then again. The next morning arrived softly over the Oregon coast, pale gold sunlight slipping through layers of fog while the Pacific rolled against the cliffs below Ethan's cabin in long steady breaths. For the first time in years, Ethan woke without panic clawing him out of sleep before dawn. He opened his eyes slowly on the couch and found Ash curled against his chest beneath the old wool blanket, warm and completely trusting. The puppy lifted his head the moment Ethan stirred, tail brushing lazily against the cushion. Ethan stared at him for a second before something unfamiliar touched the corner of his mouth. Not a full smile. But close enough to surprise him. "You hungry, partner?" Ash stood instantly. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm neither of them seemed to question. Morning smelled like black coffee, cedar smoke, and ocean air drifting through cracked kitchen windows. Ash followed Ethan everywhere through the cabin, paws clicking softly across old wooden floors while gulls circled above the cliffs outside. Some nights were still difficult. Ethan still woke breathing too fast after dreams he could never fully remember. But now every time he opened his eyes, Ash was already there. Watching. Grounding him before the darkness could pull him too far under again. One rainy afternoon Ethan found himself standing inside a small hardware store in Cannon Beach buying dog food, blankets, and a faded blue rope toy shaped like a lobster. The teenage cashier smiled when Ash sat perfectly beside Ethan's leg without command. "Beautiful shepherd," the kid said. Ethan looked down at the puppy instinctively. "Yeah," he answered quietly. "He is." The words felt strange. Human again. A week later Olivia Bennett called the cabin. "I know this is probably not your thing," she said carefully over the phone, "but we are short volunteers at the Veterans Outreach Center tomorrow. Mostly therapy visits. Coffee. Dogs. Nothing complicated." Ethan almost refused automatically. That had become his habit with people. But Ash sat near the fireplace watching him with calm amber eyes while the silence stretched between words. Ethan finally sighed. "What time?" The outreach center overlooked the harbor 2 towns south, a weathered brick building where old fishermen and aging veterans gathered whenever loneliness became heavier than pride. Rain misted gently across the docks that morning while crab boats rocked against their moorings and gulls cried overhead. Ethan parked outside and sat gripping the steering wheel for nearly a full minute before Ash nudged his elbow softly with his nose. "Yeah," Ethan muttered. "I know." Inside, the room smelled like coffee, wet jackets, and old wood polish. Veterans sat quietly around folding tables beneath faded military photographs hanging on brick walls. Some looked broken in visible ways. Others carried it in silence. Ash hesitated briefly near the doorway before moving closer to Ethan's side. Then something unexpected happened. An older Marine sitting alone near the back corner lowered his newspaper slowly and stared at the puppy. "German Shepherd?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded once. The old man smiled faintly. "Best partner I ever had wore fur." Ash walked directly toward him. No hesitation. No fear. The Marine's weathered hand trembled slightly as he reached down to scratch behind the puppy's ear. For a moment the man's tired eyes softened with something almost peaceful. Ethan stood there watching quietly while harbor fog drifted beyond the windows behind them. Another veteran approached slowly after that. Then another. Ash moved gently between them all, calm and patient in ways no 4-month-old puppy should have understood yet. At one point Ethan noticed a younger veteran sitting alone near the vending machines, shoulders tight, breathing unevenly while staring at the floor. Ash noticed too. Without command, the puppy crossed the room slowly and rested beside the man's boots until his shaking hands finally settled against warm sable fur. No words. Just presence. Ethan felt something shift quietly inside his chest while he watched. Not healed. Not finished. But moving. Like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. Outside, sunlight finally broke through the clouds over the harbor, turning the gray ocean silver beneath the morning sky. Ash looked back toward Ethan across the room, tail wagging once, and for the first time in years Ethan did not feel like a ghost standing among the living. Spring arrived slowly along the Oregon coast, not with sudden warmth but through small mercies. Fewer storms. Longer light across the water. Wild grass pushing through damp earth beside the cliffs below Ethan's cabin. By April, Ash had nearly doubled in size. His paws still looked too large for the rest of him, and one ear stubbornly refused to stand completely upright, but he moved now with growing confidence beside Ethan through every part of the day. Mornings often began before sunrise with quiet walks along the shoreline where fog drifted low across the sand and cold waves rolled endlessly toward shore beneath pale pink skies. Ethan had started sleeping again. Not perfectly. But enough. The nightmares came less often now, and when they did, they no longer ended with him sitting alone in darkness. Ash always seemed to know before the panic fully arrived. A soft nudge against his hand. Warm fur beside the bed. A steady heartbeat bringing him back to the room before memory swallowed him whole. One Saturday morning, Ethan drove north along the coastline with Ash asleep in the passenger seat and Cairo's old dog Tags resting quietly inside the truck console beside him. The road curved through towering pine forests wet from overnight rain while sunlight flickered between branches like scattered gold. He had not visited this place in years. The old overlook sat above the Pacific nearly 40 miles outside town, hidden beyond a narrow gravel road lined with wind-bent trees and sea grass. The locals called it Widow's Bluff because the cliffs dropped sharply into black water below. Ethan parked near the edge and stepped out into the cold ocean wind while gulls wheeled overhead beneath a wide silver sky. Ash followed close beside him immediately. For a moment neither moved. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, deep and restless beneath drifting fog. Years ago Ethan had stood near this same cliff believing the silence inside him would never end. Believing some people survived only physically while the rest stayed buried somewhere far away. Ash pressed gently against his leg. Ethan looked down at him and slowly crouched in the damp grass. "You know," he said quietly, fingers brushing through the thick sable fur around the puppy's neck, "I spent a long time thinking I lost everything worth keeping." Ash watched him carefully, ears twitching in the wind. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and removed Cairo's old military tags attached to the worn leather strip from the original collar. The metal clinked softly in the ocean air. He stared at them for several seconds before fastening them carefully beside Ash's new collar. "Not replacing." Continuing. Ash sat perfectly still while Ethan adjusted the leather strap beneath his fur. Then the puppy leaned forward unexpectedly and rested his head beneath Ethan's chin. Ethan closed his eyes for a second as wind rolled off the Pacific around them carrying the scent of salt, cedar, and distant rain. Somewhere below the cliffs, waves crashed endlessly against stone like the steady breathing of the earth itself. He realized then that healing had not arrived all at once. It had come quietly. In paw steps across old wooden floors. In warm breathing beside sleepless nights. In a stubborn puppy who refused to let a broken man disappear into his own silence. Ethan opened his eyes slowly and looked toward the horizon where sunlight finally broke through the fog in long golden beams across the water. Beside him, Ash stood tall against the wind now, ears lifted toward the sea, Cairo's tags glinting softly against his chest. Not the same dog. Never meant to be. But somehow carrying forward the same loyalty. The same grace. Ethan rested one hand gently along Ash's back while the two of them stood facing the ocean together beneath the widening spring sky. And for the first time in many years, the future no longer felt like something to survive. It felt like something worth walking toward.